It's recording.
Hi,
Okay.
I'm in Magnetic Island, just off the coast from Townsville, and I'm with Walter Stark, a marine biologist who's had about 60 years in marine biology and who's been living in the Great Barrier Reef area for longer than the existence of the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority. We also live in an island continent that is surrounded by seafood, and we have the world's largest continental shelf fishing zone. And yet, despite our small population, our fishing industry is almost non-existent, and we now import 3/4 of the seafood we eat to feed this tiny population. Why is that, Walter?
Well, basically, we've regulated our fishing industry pretty much out of existence. So the fish are out there, and they're catchable, and there are large quantities of them that aren't being touched, but it's virtually impossible to economically to comply with all the regulations and profitably fish them.
And now it's just like farming. The fisherman these days, or the fisher, goes out and buys a boat, buys a license, buys a quota to catch, which is setting back more than $250,000. Is that right?
Well, it'll probably be closer to $500,000 by the time you got your license, your quotas, and a boat that's substantial enough to support the cost of the licenses and quotas.
And then that fisher is controlled, his business is controlled by regulations that are developed by people in Brisbane and Canberra, correct?
Basically, office workers who have dreamed up more and more requirements and much of it is paperwork, things which go into files never to be looked at.
And they can be shut down by people in remote locations like Perth, if you're a Western Australia fisherman, or Brisbane, if you're a Queensland fisherman, correct?
Yeah, because what happens, for example, most of the boats now are required to have satellite tracking systems on them. And the fishermen that I knew that were fishing out of Broome would get a call from the fisheries office in Perth saying your tracking system isn't working, and then they would have to fly a technician up from Perth and examine the equipment and find that it was working fine, and then fly that person back. So it was costing thousands of dollars every time they got one of these calls, and they were totally vulnerable to it. There was nothing they could do about it.
And while they're checking it out, there's no fishing going on.
No.
Walter puts the main reason for it down to the fact that we are now approaching almost as many people who vote for a living as who work for a living.
Yes, that's right. For the first time in human history, we're approaching a point where about half the population isn't actually engaged in any kind of productive activity. By productive activity, I mean providing things that provide the goods and services that we need and want. Now, there's a lot of activity that's going on that's mandated by government, but nobody needs it or wants it. It's just something that's required, and that employs a lot of people.
Well, thank you very much, Walter. We'll come back on more topics.